Oh, hi there. Ollie Anderson here. Maybe you're like me and you look at the world around you and you kind of get the feeling that we're going to hell in a handcart, as the expression goes. I don't know why that's an expression. No matter what seems to happen culturally, we just get this feeling that things are increasingly getting worse and that no matter what we do, we're doomed because every day, collectively, the human race strays a little bit further into the darkness and away from the light of truth. And so everybody around us, including ourselves in many cases, are living in a kind of void where we have a sort of spiritual emptiness. We don't know why we're here. We don't know what the point is. We feel just this itch that can't be scratched, which I like to talk about all the time. So sorry if you're a regular viewer and you're sick of me saying that. And because we have this itch that can't be scratched, we feel like we need to heal ourselves in some way. And so we start to go onto the internet and we try and find a way to heal ourselves. And that's when we end up finding one of the two new religions, let's say, that people turn to for meaning within our culture. The first one being self help, the second one being astrology or related systems of new age nonsense, in my opinion. And they think that they found a solution to their problems, to the emptiness that they feel and the lack of meaning in their lives. But really, they just got stuck because self help simply just says, you are the problem. Fix yourself and you can have whatever you want. Everything will be fine. Astrology says, well, the stars are the problem. And if you're lucky and you do what the stars tell you to do without actually tapping into your own resources and power, then maybe something might happen. And I'm here to say that what both of those things say is a kind of ego fueled bullshittery because actually the only thing that works is reality. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. To really understand the state of the world, you need to understand shame. Shame is basically the feeling that we get when we become disconnected from the truth, when we become disconnected from who we really are. I've made 1,000,003 videos about this, slight exaggeration. But ultimately, what happens is in our childhood, somewhere along the line, we become ashamed of who we are. And so we create a fake version of ourselves. What actually happens is once we become ashamed and we become split within ourselves and disconnected from the truth, we enter what I call the void, a world of fragmentation instead of wholeness. And once we've entered this void where we'll always feel that something's missing and we have that famous itch that can't be scratched, then we start to think that the void is reality. And so what we do is we put a mask on within the dream world of the void and we think that we are that mask. When it comes to what we're talking about in this video, self-help and astrology and related systems, what you need to understand is that when people have shame, it can show up in different ways because of the way that they try to cope with it. Some people, they become really neurotic. So once they feel the shame inside themselves, that inner split, the way that the neurotic type will deal with it is that they say, okay, I feel the shame, but I'm going to inflate myself so I feel bigger than I am as a way of compensating. And I'm going to try and control everything. I'm going to take loads of action. I am going to become the master of my fate and the captain of my destiny, or whatever the quote is from that poem Invictus. And I'm going to take total control of my life. On the other side of the coin, though, you get people who are still driven by the same sort of shame, but they deal with it in a slightly different way. They cope by not self-inflating, but by self-defeating. They kind of roll over and they convince themselves that they have no control over their lives and they become a kind of disordered type, which sounds brutal, but that's what I'm going to call it. They're disordered in the sense that their sense of order within themselves, because of the fragmentation, has basically just caused them to become disconnected from their power. And so what that ultimately means is people have this core problem with shame, feeling of not being good enough, or however you want to say it. And then they go down one of two paths. They either become really neurotic and try and control everything, or they become really disordered, which does sound brutal, and therefore kind of feel like they have no power. So there's no point taking action or doing anything. What's really interesting is that if you look at these two religions or school of thoughts around how you can heal yourself that are dominant in our culture right now, then they align with the ways that people can react to their own shame. If somebody is neurotic, it basically means that they're blaming themselves for the state of their lives. We need some personal responsibility in life in order to move forward and to grow. We have to own our stuff, face our emotions, take action, and all that kind of stuff. But the neurotic type takes that to the extreme, and they blame themselves so much and they take on so much responsibility that they feel like they can have total control over their lives. If they just figure out the right process, the right system, they get the right habits, they take action constantly without actually ever taking a break or anything like that. And so they get really into the kind of hustler self-help culture, whatever you want to call it, that causes them to live in that way. That might work for a while because they're going to start taking new actions. They're going to actually get some results because action always takes you somewhere. It might not be the right action because it might be action that's driven by ego instead of something real, which I've talked about in other videos. But eventually, because they're not being driven by anything true or real inside themselves and they're just trying to outrun their shame, they're going to burn out. And so that approach, the self-help approach, doesn't actually help. It just makes you more neurotic, and it takes the ego that you've created for yourself as a reaction to your shame, and it turns up the volume on all of the coping strategies that come with that ego, trying to control things, taking too much responsibility, blah 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 blah. Those things eventually destroy you because they're not real. But then on the other side of the coin, you have the disordered type, whatever you want to call it, who are ultimately not blaming themselves, they're blaming the world. We've all met people like this, unfortunately, where they can't take any responsibility. They just want to moan about all their problems. They just want to unload on you. Energy vampires is a common way of describing these people. And for them, astrology is very attractive, or at least the modern day spiritual bullshittery astrology. Maybe there's some stuff about it, I don't know. But the common, the modern common version of astrology gives these people an excuse not to act. Instead of them having to look at themselves and say, okay, where do I need to take some responsibility? Where do I need to take some action? What do I need to change about myself? They get stuck in this loop of just going down the rabbit hole of astrological reports and birth charts and all these different things to try and validate the ego that they've currently created for themselves and identified with as a reaction to the shame that they picked up way back when. And so instead of growing through that ego and integrating the shadow and becoming real and all that kind of stuff, they just add more layers of confusion and complexity and nonsense to their experience and understanding of themselves that stops them from moving forward. And so even though these two things look totally different, the people that are totally into self-help and the people that are totally into astrology, it seems like they're on, polar opposites, which I suppose you could say they are to some extent. Beneath the surface of that, it's always the same problem. They're trying to run away from the shame. In both of these cases, both the self-help stuff and the astrological ETC type things, the end result of following these paths to their logical consequence is that you stop growing. You stay stuck. It looks like you're on a slightly different path, but because there's nothing changing underneath the surface of your relationship with yourself, because you're stuck in the void and you put that mask on in the dream world of the void and you're playing a kind of character, aka the ego, then you just end up taking action that gives you the illusion of progress, but that doesn't actually take you where you want to be. Because really, where we all want to be is in a place where we feel real, we're getting a sense of flow, there is no shame driving us, and we're dissolving any unhealthy or unwanted emotional stuff by taking action that actually matters to us. In the case of self help stuff, people stay stuck because the actions that they're taking are just an extension of their ego. All of the things that they have, all of the coping strategies that they have put in place in order to deal with their shame, like being a control freak, like taking too much responsibility, like taking action as a distraction instead of being present with themselves, etc. All of those things just get exacerbated by the self-help approach. The other problem is when people set goals for themselves and things like that, but they haven't done inner work, which people who are into self-help and driven by shame often end up doing, then the goals that they do set are actually an outsourcing of their self-worth. And so they're not living in reality. They're not being present. They're constantly chasing something that they think is finally going to fill the void. And it could be anything. People will literally use anything as a substitute for the truth, which is the only thing that can fill the void. But when people are in the state of constantly chasing things, that means they're not present in their lives. They're just distracting themselves with all of this activity for the sake of activity, which feels like self-help because they think that one day they'll get to this imaginary point, this fabled point where everything is fine. But actually what happens in most cases is people attain their goals, and because they no longer have the chase and they haven't done the inner work and they don't have a solid foundation, then they just feel empty. And so they have to create another goal and another goal. And they spend their whole lives on a hamster wheel, living those lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau called them. With the astrological stuff, people are stuck in a slightly different way, which I alluded to already earlier in the video, but I'm going to go into a bit more detail now. The way that this works is people stay stuck in their identity. And so they don't necessarily take any action, but what they will do is use astrology and what they've learned from reading about astrology as a way to deflect the actions that they need to take. So it might become quite clear that, say they have a certain goal, they want to start a business or whatever it is, that they need to do something, but then they'll convince themselves that actually they don't need to do it because either the universe is just going to protect them or because it goes against their star sign or what's going on with Mercury or Uranus or whatever. And so they have an excuse not to take action, which ultimately means not to face the edge of themselves and get out of the comfort zone. We're just going to bring up the shadow self and reconfigure the ego and all that kind of thing. And so they're just constantly finding ways to reinforce the identity that they already have, even though that identity is the problem. In both cases, actually, that's always the problem. The ego, but sometimes your ego is going to make you control everything, and other times your ego is going to make you feel like you have no control. And because that's just a part of the human experience, people are either going to go predominantly in one or the other direction. Well, these systems that we've created and come up with in our culture are actually just ways of appealing to those personality defects that stop people growing real. So if the self-help thing doesn't work and the astrology thing doesn't work, what are we supposed to do? Well, the only thing we can do is face reality, align ourselves with the truth, live the truth. That's it. Reality is always the way to go because reality is the only place that you can get results. And of course, there'll be some people out there that say, well, who really knows what reality is? Because I have my interpretation and you have your interpretation. The best answer to that question is what Jesus said. By your fruit, you shall know them. But he was talking about false prophets, but we can still use this. Basically, the fruit that you get shows you how real things are, basically, right? So if you're trying to get certain results and you never do, well, either your approach to bringing that fruit into your life is incorrect, or the fruit that you're trying to bring into your life doesn't exist. So if I'm trying to bring more money into my life and it never happens, then I need to change my process. The process isn't real. If I'm trying to bring a unicorn into my life, it's not the process, it's the way that I'm thinking and my emotions that are making me want a unicorn in the first place. Because unicorns don't exist, not as a real thing. Maybe you could put a banana on a horse or something, but that doesn't count. But anyway, the only thing we can do is to get in reality. What that means is we need to forget both of these approaches. It's not about self-help where we're broken and we're trying to fix ourselves all the time. And if we just fix ourselves, then things are going to work out. And it's not about astrology where we just say, okay, we don't have any control. My life is in the hands of Uranus or Saturn or whatever other planets are out there, even though there are all kinds of debates about like when astrology started and how the stars have shifted anyway. So the way that they're mapping things to it doesn't even make sense. The point is, it's not about taking total control and it's not about having no control. It's about being a human being, being real and understanding that it's both to some extent. You can take some control, you can take action and you should take action, but it's also about realizing when you don't have control, realizing that you have to do your best and let go of the rest. What that ultimately means is you trust yourself to take the actions that you can take, and then you let go and ride through uncertainty and trust life in the periods of uncertainty when you don't know what's happening. You can have a vision for your life and you can have goals and you know the general direction that you're heading in, but we can't control everything. And as we do move towards our vision, we're going to keep growing, we're going to keep changing. And so who we think we are at the start of the journey is never the same as who we end up being by the time we get there. And we have to work with that process. If we're too controlling or we're so out of control that we feel our identity is the only thing we can cling to, then we're never going to make any progress. And so again, as with most of the things I say recently, it comes down to trust. If you don't trust yourself, you'll never take action that's real. If you don't trust life, then you'll just end up trying to control everything, or you'll think that life itself is a threat, the forces of life, chaos, God, whatever you call it. And so you'll just roll over and give up. Human beings have power, but they don't have total power. We're not omnipotent. We know a lot of things, but we don't know everything. We're not omniscient. And so any system that tries to make you believe you can have knowledge that is just never yours to have, or that you can take actions that are never yours to take, in the case of the self-help thing, then it's going to be fake. It's going to be a flawed system, and you're just going to be running around in circles, getting caught up in that ego and getting lost. There's a story about two guys in the desert, and they're tying their camels up for the night. Well, that's not entirely true. They're getting ready for the night, and they need to leave their camels somewhere. One guy starts tying his camel up, and the other guy doesn't. The guy who's tied up his camel is kind of shocked to see that his friend isn't tied up his camel. So he asks him what he's doing. He's saying, "Why are you not tying up your camel? If you don't tie it up for the night, it's going to run off into the desert while we're asleep in these tents, and then you'll be in big trouble in the morning." The guy who didn't tie up his camel says, "Well, God is going to protect me. I'm just going to leave it to the universe, and my camel's going to be fine. Let's go to bed." So they both go to sleep, and in the morning they wake up. Surprise, surprise, there's only one camel there, and it's the camel that got tied to the tree. The guy who didn't tie up his camel is kind of shocked. His whole belief system is shattered around him, and the world is not what he thought it was. And he starts lamenting the fact that his camel has wandered off into the desert and he doesn't have it. He starts saying, I can't believe this. God, how could you do this to me? etc, etc. The other guy gets on his camel and he starts wandering off into the desert. And he says, why should God do for you what you can do for yourself? So that was a video about how, in general, in our culture, there are two approaches that people take towards healing themselves, if you want to use that word, but that are unfortunately often aligned with the personality defects that are actually causing the problems in the first place. Either being too neurotic and controlling, or being too disordered and thinking that they have no control. And then it just ends up creating this kind of loop where they get stuck in their patterns of thinking and they increase all of the things that are holding them back from their real lives. And then they don't really get anywhere and nothing ever changes. They stay stuck. The real approach is to realize you don't need either of those things. You need to understand to the greatest extent who you are, what you're capable of, what you want, by forgetting about the ego, facing your shadow self, all the hidden parts of yourself that hide behind the mask that you're wearing, and then start taking real action without expecting to control everything. As you move forward and you take real action, you're going to keep learning, and life is going to show you the next steps. And then you take that next step, and then you take the next one, and then the next one. If you live like that, instead of being driven by shame, which both the neurotic and the disordered types are, your shame will dissolve and you can get in the flow and life will be awesome. This is the best, realist way to do things because you're not trying to be something that you're not. You're embracing who you are and what you are, which is a human being, and you're going to get real results because real always works. So that was my little video about that. If anybody wants to talk to me, I can help you to move forward in life. You can book a free call on my website, ollieanderson.co.uk/talk. It's a free coaching session, not a sales call. I also have a new book called Trust, which covers some of the things I've talked about in this video. Kind of ultimately, it will help you to trust yourself and trust life, which is what it's all about. You can get that on my website, ollieanderson.co.uk/trust. But in the meantime, don't fall for the bullshittery that's out there. You don't need to control everything by giving into self-help. You don't need to give up control. You're a real human being and you can get far, but you gotta be real enough to do it. So yes, hope that helps you. Stay real on there. Peace to you.